Okay, so today we're looking at the poem Exposure by Wilfred Owen. And let's talk a little bit about Wilfred Owen. He was a soldier and an officer in World War One. And he saw and basically reported on through his poetry of the full horror of conditions on the front line. He wrote a number of poems about this, which exposed the horrors of the trenches in particular. And the war itself was often criticised because of a huge loss of life for very little gain. And during the Somme, over 60,000 British soldiers died in one day. And in all, they only gained 6 miles by the end of the war. Owen's poems were often angry that the soldiers were in muddy and dangerous conditions in the trenches while the generals behind the lines were living in comfort. And Owen's poems tried to show the truth of conditions to people back home. He wasn't against fighting, but he was very angry about the condition that the soldiers had to live in order to do so. And he was shot in 1918 and killed, and he actually died before the end of the war. His poetry was aided to become published by another war poet, Siegfried Sassoon. So think about the title Exposure first. What does the title of the poem suggest? And if you think about what we've just discussed about the horrors of the trenches, so jot down some ideas. Exposure, so it means to be exposed to something. So if you think about the conditions that we've talked about, very muddy, very unpleasant, you're exposing yourself to danger, but also to the elements as well. So think about the significance of that. So let's now watch the poem and then we'll have a read through of it also. So if you could read along, if you like, with your anthology as well. But obviously this is a video and the imagery does add to the understanding of the poem.
Our brains ache in the merciless, icy winds that knife us. Wearied, we keep awake because the night is silent. Low drooping flares confuse our memory of the salient. Worried by silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous, but nothing happens. Watching, we hear the mad gusts tugging on the wire, like twitching agonies of men among its brambles. Northward incessantly, the flickering gunnery rumbles, far off like a dull rumour of some other war. What are we doing here? The poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. We only know war lasts, rain soaks, and clouds sag stormy. Dawn massing in the east, her melancholy army attacks once more in ranks on shivering ranks of grey. But nothing happens. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence, less deathly than the air that shudders black with snow, with sidelong flowing flakes that flock, pause and renew. We watch them wandering up and down the wind's nonchalance, but nothing happens. Pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. We cringe in holes, back on forgotten dreams, and stare at snow days, deep into grassier ditches. So we drowse, sun-dozed, littered with blossoms trickling where the blackbird fusses. Is it that we are dying? Slowly our ghosts drag home, glimpsing the sunk fires, glozed with crusted dark red jewels. Crickets jingle there. For hours the innocent mice rejoice. The house is theirs. Shutters and doors all close. On us the doors are closed. We turn back to our dying, since we believe not otherwise can kind fires burn, nor ever suns smile true on child or field or fruit. For God's invincible spring, our love is made afraid. Therefore therefore not loath. We lie out here, therefore we're born. For love of God seems dying. Tonight this frost will fasten on this mud and us, shriveling many hands and puckering foreheads crisp. The burying party picks and shovels in their shaking grasp, pause over half-known faces. All their eyes are ice, but nothing happens.
Okay, so once you've had a look at the reading of the poem, you may want to rewind it so that you can answer the next couple of questions. So what are your first interpretations of exposure? If you could jot down a few ideas and pause. Okay, so some possible interpretations from the first read or watch of exposure. It describes the extreme weather conditions which men were subjected to in the trenches and what they also died of, which is a different type of suffering. Again, we've had some different perspectives of conflict. Here again, we have a different perspective of conflict, exposing the actuality of war in the trenches. And perhaps Owen himself exposes himself to public criticism here by giving such a stark reality when previously war poems showed the patriarchy, the strength of the soldiers, positive view of war. Okay, so if you could pause here, we have the full poem. We are in the second part going to annotate it, analyse it and annotate it. But you could have a good read through now if you haven't got your anthology on you. And then I'll move on to the next slide. So here we have some pictures, just kind of to, again, have a look at what it must have been like. This is the picture that is being described in the poem itself. The front line, how horrendous it must have been to be exposed to this fear, this threat, and also the conditions in which you had to deal with. So have a look through these. Absolutely terrifying, horrendous images. So what we learn from this poem: in war, the real enemy can be nature or the elements. And here we have the example of pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. War can kill a man in a spiritual, if not a physical way. Slowly, our ghosts drag home. Which is quite powerful, really, isn't it? And war can lead to a loss of faith in God. God is responsible for the suffering caused by nature. Tonight, his frost will fasten on this mud and us. There is a certain amount of anger in the tone of this poem. And you can sense this through from the poet himself very much in this poem. Okay, so that is the end of part one. When we've been introduced to the poem, the second part is going to be longer. It's going to be where you will be able to annotate the poem and we'll analyse it. We'll look at themes too.